Somewhere in Lancaster County, a farmer walks 1,000 acres of corn and beans before sunrise. And he has not sprayed a single synthetic pesticide on any of it. Not this year, not once in his life. That should be impossible, because the industry reportedly spends billions of dollars a year fighting insects that would otherwise strip a field bare. But this farm keeps winning anyway, and by the end of this, you will know the one decision behind it. It is not a spray. It is not a trap. It is not a secret formula in a barn. You start at the fence line, where the field ends and the next one begins. On a lot of American farms, that line does not exist. Corn runs to the horizon in every direction. The same plant, the same roots, the same chemistry, for 1,000 acres at a stretch. Here it is different. Beans this year, corn next year, hay the year after that. And the fence line shows up every few hundred feet instead of every few miles. You can smell the difference before you can explain it. Cut hay in one field, turn soil in the next, and somewhere off to your left, horses. That rotation is not decoration. It is the first wall against the smallest threat on the farm: weeds. Pull a weed here today and it does not come back tomorrow the way it would on a field that never changes. Every crop draws different nutrients, casts a different shade, feeds a different set of roots into the same dirt. And a weed built to thrive under last year's corn finds nothing to hold on to under this year's clover. You still walk the rows by hand, hoe over the shoulder, hat down against the glare, checking for what got past the rotation. It is slow, and nobody here is pretending otherwise. But weeds are the easy problem, and the real threat is already moving. Insects do not care that the field looks different from the road. They care whether there is enough of one plant packed close enough together for a population to explode. And this is where the fence lines start to matter in a way you would not expect. A monoculture is not just a farming style, it is an insect's dream. One continuous buffet with no edges and no predators. Break that buffet into 40-acre pieces separated by fence rows, hedges, and a different crop next door, and the math changes. A beetle that could have bred through 1,000 acres of the same plant now hits a border it cannot cross in one generation. Along those borders, something else is working for you. Marigolds and basil tucked in near the tomatoes, not because they look nice, but because their scent throws off a pest's sense of where the meal is. Wildflowers left standing at the field's edge draw in ladybugs, and a single ladybug can eat several hundred aphids before it is done for the season. Nobody paid for that. Nobody sprayed for it either. You planted the right neighbours and let the insects sort out the rest of the argument between themselves. Walk that hedgerow in July and you can hear the difference before you see it. A low, steady hum of bees working the clover, wasps checking the underside of leaves for something smaller to eat. The whole strip of unmowed ground working like a hired hand nobody has to pay. Your boots are wet to the ankle from dew that has not burned off yet, and the corn on the other side of the row is already 3 feet taller than it was 2 weeks ago. You crouch down at one plant, turn a leaf over, And there it is, a cluster of aphids with 3 ladybug larvae already working through them. You do not need to do anything here. You just needed to leave the ladybugs somewhere to live. Still, some years the argument does not go your way. A potato beetle outbreak can strip a row bare in under a week. And when that happens, there is no chemical waiting in the barn to bail you out. So you go back to the oldest tool there is: hands, buckets. You spend the whole afternoon bent over the potato rows, thumb and forefinger working down each stem, dropping orange-striped beetles into a can of soapy water that starts to smell faintly of kerosene by the 3rd hour. Your back gives out before your patience does. 9 days is nothing. A neighbouring farm 3 fields over would clear the same acreage in 10 minutes with a sprayer mounted behind a tractor. You will spend 6 hours doing it with your hands, and you will be back out here again when the next hatch comes up. That is only the insects. Underneath the leaves, a quieter threat is working on its own timeline. A wet spring can bring blight through a bean field before anyone notices the first spotted leaf. And blight does not care how carefully you rotated your crops. What it cares about is how crowded the rows are and how long the leaves stay damp before the sun gets to them. So the spacing between plants here is wider than it needs to be for yield alone. Wide enough that air actually moves through the field and dries the leaves by mid-morning instead of by noon. Rows run with the prevailing wind instead of against it. None of that shows up on a seed packet. It shows up as 1 fewer disease outbreak a year, quietly, in a field that never gets credit for the blight that never started. Underneath all of it sits the thing you cannot see from the road, which is the soil itself. It decides everything. Chemical fertilizer forces a plant to grow fast on borrowed strength, and a plant grown that way is softer, weaker, and more attractive to everything looking for an easy meal. Here the fields are fed on composted manure from the same horses that pulled the plough, wood ash from the stove, and whatever came off last year's harvest and went back into the ground instead of into a truck. That builds soil slowly, over years, not weeks. But a plant that grows into strong soil grows a thicker skin and a stronger root, and disease has a much harder time getting a foothold in a plant that was never rushed. Put a number on the gap and it gets uncomfortable fast. A conventional operation running 1,000 acres of a single crop might spend somewhere in the range of $30 to $60 an acre on pesticide alone in a hard year, according to figures that circulate among agronomists, which puts a farm this size in the tens of thousands of dollars before a single bushel gets sold. This farm spends closer to nothing on the same line item and makes up the difference the only way it can: in hours. More people in the field, more children old enough to carry a bucket, more evenings that stretch later than anyone would like. The trade is real on both sides. One farm buys back its time with cash, and the other buys back its cash with time. And neither one is getting a discount. There is a third worker on this farm that never shows up on any budget at all. Leave the fence rows wild instead of mowing them to the dirt, and barn swallows move in under the eaves by the dozen, cutting through a swarm of insects over the fields every evening at a pace no human could match. Bats take the night shift. A single barn owl, if you can keep one nesting nearby, will work through more field mice in a season than 100 traps could. None of this was designed by an entomologist. It is just what happens when a farm leaves room for something other than the crop to live on it, instead of clearing every inch down to bare, sprayable dirt. That is the part almost nobody outside these communities understands, and it is worth saying plainly. There is no single trick behind any of it, not a spray recipe, not a secret oil passed down in a notebook. The answer has been sitting in plain sight the whole season. A pest outbreak needs scale to become a disaster. Deny it the scale, in field size, in crop variety, in distance between one vulnerable plant and the next, and most outbreaks simply run out of room before they run out of appetite. Most days, that means quietly refusing to build the kind of farm an insect population needs in order to explode, rather than chasing insects down one at a time. It should be said clearly, because the fields themselves would say it if they could, not every AMISH farm runs this way. Some communities allow herbicides, some allow certain sprays under their own church rules. And the picture varies from settlement to settlement, from one bishop's district to the next. This is not a single unbroken rule followed by an entire people. It is a set of choices some communities have kept, rooted less in a ban on chemicals for their own sake, and more in an older belief about the land itself, that it was given to be cared for, not simply extracted from, and that convenience is not worth much if it costs you the ground you will hand to your children. You walk the fence line again at the end of the day, the light going long and orange across a field that still has every plant in it that started the season there. No crop duster passed overhead this morning. No truck from a chemical company idled in the driveway waiting on a signature. Just a rotation planned 2 years ago. A hedge full of ladybugs doing their quiet work. And a farmer who spent an hour at dusk checking rows by hand, because that is what the method actually costs. It costs time instead of money, and patience instead of a spray tank. And on a farm built this way, that trade has been paying off for longer than anyone alive can remember. So the question worth sitting with is not really about the AMISH at all. It is about what the rest of agriculture gave up to get faster. 1,000 acres, pest-free, with nothing in the shed but hand tools and patience, while farms 3 times the size down the road spend a fortune every season keeping the same insects at bay with chemistry instead of structure. The trade was time for money, and it went one direction for almost everyone. So which one would you actually choose if you had to live inside the answer for the next 30 years, not just admire it from the road?